So the second part of your homework assignment this week is talking about layers and transparency. And what I want you to think about is how stacking images on top of each other, but in particular imagery that doesn't necessarily have visual connotations, but maybe is more about texture or an icon, and how when you stack those on top of each other, maybe partially or in full, or there's some transparency, how it can start to change the meaning of the original image. So here we have two examples of photographs on the background layers, and in this one there's an icon on top of it, and on this one we have a texture on top of it that's partially opaque and then it's partially transparent. So how does this interaction start to change this original image? If you can imagine what this image looked like before, either one of them before, it starts to give us a different read, a different information about it, a different meaning, and a different emotional context to it as well. So what I've asked you to do for the practice is to go to the section on tutorial and download both texture and sky, or once you have them open, you could also just right click on them and say copy image. And when you're over in Photoshop, if you go to File, New, there's an option right here to choose Clipboard, and if I hit Create, it's going to create a new document that's the same size of whatever I've just saved to my clipboard. And so now I could go to Edit, Paste, or use the keyboard shortcut Control V, and I can paste that image in. So I have my sky in one image, and I have my texture. I've already done it in another image, and I want to copy the texture over to the sky one. So I'm going to select everything. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Control A, but you could also go up under Select All. So I've selected, and now I'm going to copy, Control C, or I could go up under Edit, Copy. And then I'm going to click into the tab for my sky, and you could do Edit, Paste, or just Control V and paste it in. And so now I have over here my layers panel. The top layer is the texture, which I could rename. I'm going to do a slow double click on layer 2, and I'll call it texture. And same thing for this one. This is sky. And then I have that plain background that just came when I created my new document. If I wanted to change the layer order, I click and I drag in between, and I could change what's on top. So the way Photoshop sees layers is whatever's on the top, it sees it literally like it's being placed on top of the bottom layer. So the first thing you could experiment with is just layer opacity. I'm going to click on my top layer, the texture one, and then go right above it to the opacity slider, opacity field, click on the arrow to get the slider and lower that down. And as I lower it down, I can start to see an interaction happening between my texture layer and the photographic layer. And now it really starts to almost look like a damaged photograph. So for your exercise, please don't use mine. These are just for the examples, but I'd like you to find some other ones of maybe photographs of your own, or maybe take photographs of some texture or things up close. Or if you have access to a scanner, it can be really cool to take some paper, crumple it up, throw it into the scanner. If you want to move things around, we're using our Move tool up here. It's the top tool on the toolbar, or that's also the keyboard shortcut V. Make sure that you are either on the layer that you intend to move, or you have the auto select on. In this case, because my texture takes up the whole layer, the only way I could move my sky layer is if I selected the sky layer and I turned auto select off. Because if not, I'm always grabbing the texture. So I could also try experimenting with, moving the bottom layer over. So now I'm adjusting the sky layer. Alright? So play with these, move them around, see like what's kind of interesting, and you can have your history panel open and take different snapshots as you go along the way, and then you can decide which one you think is your best final version. Just going to minimize that, bring it over here. Okay, what else can you do? You could, I'm going to bring everything, actually, I'll use my history panel to go back a couple steps to the steps before I started moving things around. Alright, and I'll minimize that again. So this time, let's make it more like the example of the girl where she had a section cut out from the texture layer. I'm going to take my rectangular selection tool, but just to note, there are other selection tools if I click and hold that down. And I can click and drag. If I hold my shift key down, that'll lock proportion so it's a square, but I want to make a rectangle. And click and drag it across. And now I could hit the delete key. And so that's how you create that effect. How do I get rid of my selection? Control D, or go up to select, deselect. So I need to get rid of my selection to be able to move on to any other step. I'll try something else just to show you another thing you could try. I'm going to take the selection tool again. I'll make another selection. And this time I'm going to take my eraser tool, the regular eraser tool over here, and I'm going to go up to my options bar and I'm going to lower the opacity down to 30%. So I'm not erasing at 100%. So when I deleted up here, that was at 100%. So here I am going to erase at a lower opacity. Now I'm at a very small brush. I don't really like that. I can go back up to my options bar and use the slider and make it larger. You can also use the left and right square bracket keys on your keyboard to adjust the size of that. So I'm using my right square bracket key. It makes the diameter of my brush larger, and the left smaller. And that works for every single one of your tools that has a diameter. Okay, so here I sort of got some smudge marks. I don't really like that. I want to step back and back to the step before I started erasing, and take my eraser tool again at this larger size. I want to have a very large brush, and notice how when I brush over, it only erases what's in my selection, and I just go over it one time, and then Control D. So that could also be kind of interesting. So I'm erasing, but not completely erasing. So these are just some basic methods for playing with texture in Photoshop. You could do more advanced things if you're familiar with masks, so it's non-destructive. Or just for the sake of this one, I'd say, work with making selections, erase, or just use the delete. Experiment with the different levels of opacity. Experiment with moving the layer order up and down. And I think that really should be all that you need for this particular example. All right, let me know if you have any questions.